wait a minute. Let me say something. Let me say something, man. Because that was a hell of an accusation that brother accused him of. Because that's an automatic death sentence to send somebody to kill another guy.
On April 22, 1995, at a house on Maxson Road in El Monte, California, a four-door sedan pulled up just after 10 at night. Three men walked straight to the back of the house. A neighbor across the street heard between 10 and 15 gunshots. The car pulled away, headlights off. Minutes later, a boy ran next door, shirt soaked in blood, saying his family had been shot. Officers found 5 people dead. In one room, they found a little girl, unhurt, hiding. The man prosecutors would later point to as the source of that order had one green eye and one blue eye, and he spoke Spanish better than most of the Mexican-born men he ran with. He wasn't Mexican. In January of that same year, the man the shooters eventually came looking for, a former Mexican Mafia member named Anthony Moreno, was living 2 apartments down from him. 3 months before the shooting, on a hotel room tape law enforcement had running without anyone in that room knowing it, this same man's voice can be heard talking about the man in that house. His name was Raymond Shryock. Inside the Mexican Mafia, they called him Huero Shy. In this video, we're going to find out how a white man built enough standing inside an organization defined by Mexican identity to reach its most senior seat, and why the one condition he put on a killing turned out to be the only part nobody followed. Before we get into this, if you're watching on your phone, hit the hype button and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. A man who did years in custody alongside him described him this way: one green eye, one blue eye, a voice so deep and so level that when he spoke in a room full of made men, the room went quiet. He carried himself rough, permanently irritated, like someone who had stopped being surprised by anything decades earlier. The contradiction people always came back to was that the same man was, underneath all of that, warm. He loved his friends without reservation. He loved his own children. He could sit and laugh for hours once he trusted you, and he trusted almost no one. Both of those things were true about him for as long as anyone knew him, which is what made him hard for people to describe cleanly. He told people more than once that he carried Cherokee blood and Polish blood, and that his heart belonged to Mexico. He spoke Spanish cleaner than most of the men who had grown up speaking it at home. Inside an organization that existed, at its root, to protect Mexican-American prisoners from everyone else, being white at all made him almost unheard of. By the rules the organization was founded on, he should never have had a path into that room in the first place. He wasn't the first white man to hold rank in the Mexican Mafia. An older member named Joe Morgan had gotten there decades earlier, and the two were close for years before Morgan died in prison in the early 90s. But by the time this story takes place, Shryock was one of very few, and the most senior one still standing. He came up through Varrio Artesia, a small street gang in Los Angeles County. He did time at San Quentin, and in 1972, somewhere around 21 years old, he was inducted into the Mexican Mafia. He wasn't inducted alone. In that same prison that same year, another young man walked the same path into the same organization. His name was Anthony Moreno. 23 years later, one of them would be giving an order, and the other would be the reason for it. Years after that, in the security housing unit at Folsom, Shryock and a few other men were taking laps around a yard too small to really run in. It had rained, and loose granite had rolled down a retaining wall above the yard. Shryock picked up a rock, flat, rough-edged, about 5 inches long, and joked that it would make a good knife sharpener. Then he called a young man over from across the yard, someone barely a member yet, and pressed the rock into his hand. He told him to take it back to the block. Everyone in earshot understood what that meant. Strip searches were routine, and getting something back into a locked unit meant hiding it inside your own body. The young man's eyes went wide. He nodded and accepted it anyway, because that was what a senior member asked of you. Another man in the group finally couldn't hold it in and told him it was a joke. The relief on the kid's face was, by every account, the funniest part of the whole thing. There's a story that followed Shryock for decades, one that turned into a kind of legend inside the organization, that he was a necrophiliac. Older members would tell it to younger ones almost as an initiation joke, a way of testing whether a new man would ask about it out loud. He wasn't one. The truth of it, according to a man who was there, ran like this. In February of 1977, at a house in Rosemead, one member struck another during an argument, which under the Mexican Mafia's rules was an offense punishable by death. The men in the house stabbed him and rolled his body into a carpet, propping it over the edge of a bathtub to drain while they went to get a car. They asked Shryock to stay behind and watch the body, and handed him a pack of cigarettes. When they got back, he told them, patting the corpse, that he was fine. That's the entire story. It followed him for decades anyway. The account has never been tested in a courtroom, and in the telling, his own role went no further than guarding a body someone else had already made. He was also, by the same accounts, the kind of friend who didn't ask what you needed before showing up. Years after a street fight had left an old grudge against him, Shryock walked onto the Folsom yard one morning, already carrying a blade he'd had made without being asked. He opened his jacket to show it, said only that he'd heard someone disrespected him, and told him they should go handle it together. No talk of strategy, no question about whether it was worth the risk, just the knife and the offer. Around 1990, inside the Los Angeles County Jail, Shryock spent months in the cell next to a man who would become one of his closest friends. That man watched him go through what looked, at the time, like heart attacks, chest pain, a racing pulse, the feeling that something was about to go badly wrong, that he was dying right there on the floor of his cell. He called for emergency help more than once, and deputies came running each time, because that call is not one anyone in a jail unit takes lightly. By the third episode, another man on the tier had started mocking him for it, calling out that he was dying again every time it happened. Doctors eventually prescribed lithium. What Shryock was living with, by every description that followed him afterward, was untreated post-traumatic stress, the kind that comes from taking part in violence for years and also being on the receiving end of it, whether anyone around him had a name for it or not. There was a woman in his life during those years, connected to a man he trusted. When other members decided to kill him, that woman agreed to leave the apartment so it could happen. He didn't find out for months. He never forgave her. And in the middle of that betrayal, he asked for exactly one favor from his friend: that the woman's brother never be allowed to join the Mexican Mafia for as long as Shryock stayed alive. They shook hands on it. Years later, when that man's name came up for a vote, the promise held, and he was blocked. By the time federal agents were building their case, Shryock lived in Glassell Park, but the territory he ran was El Monte, California, a small city east of Los Angeles where, according to law enforcement, he controlled most of what moved through the local drug trade. He didn't collect the money himself. A goddaughter of his handled that, moving cash and messages on his behalf so that his own hands stayed clean of it. A courier close enough to be trusted with money, but young enough and unconnected enough on paper to draw less attention doing it. One letter she wrote, asking, in her own words, to build her way in that city under his guidance, became, according to the case brought against her, evidence enough to get her indicted. Shryock's wife, a woman known as Bunny, had children from an earlier relationship. One of her sons was killed in gang violence, and Shryock, by one account, tried to have the people responsible put on a list marked for death. There is one more thing from those same years worth putting next to all of it. After a man named Leonzo Moreno lost his own brother to gang violence, he sat down with Shryock and a handful of others to try to stop the killing between local street gangs. The group worked. Drive-by shootings in the area dropped off for a while. Shryock was, at the same time he sat in those meetings, already sitting in hotel rooms deciding who else in the area needed to die. The clearest example of that is the case that would eventually put him in prison for the rest of his life. On March 13, 1994, a man named Freddy Garcia was shot in the leg. The next day, a man named Larry Hernandez shot two other men, Hector Galvez and Albert Arasco. Galvez survived, Arasco didn't. 1 week later, on a recorded conversation, Shryock told a fellow member that he was the one who'd sent men after Arasco and Galvez. His reasoning, in his own words, was that the three of them had been putting guns to the heads of small children and beating old women to take their money. He said he warned the men to stop collecting and told them that the next time they crossed paths, they were free to kill them if they wanted to. 6 days after that, at a meeting law enforcement was secretly filming, he said almost the same thing again, on camera. A jury would later find that Shryock had ordered Arasco's murder to increase his own standing inside the organization. It is the only killing in this entire case that a jury directly convicted him of ordering. And the reasoning behind it, protecting children from men who terrorize them, is close to word for word the same reasoning Shryock would use 13 months later for the opposite purpose. Arasco wasn't the only name on Shryock's list that year. At one of the same filmed meetings, members decided that a fellow Mexican Mafia member named Jesse Aragon needed to die for failing to carry out an assigned killing and for speaking up against an earlier order to kill another member, a man named Philip Escobar. A few days after that meeting, the organization assigned someone to go kill Aragon. The man they assigned to do it was Escobar, the very man Aragon had tried to save. Shryock offered to provide the gun himself. Nobody in that room seems to have found the arrangement strange enough to mention out loud. Police arrested Aragon before Escobar ever reached him, which is the only reason this case file ends with an arrest instead of a body. None of this would have reached a courtroom without 18 months of surveillance running through 1994 and into the spring of 1995. Investigators secretly filmed 18 separate meetings of Mexican Mafia members, almost all of them inside hotel rooms. Most of those rooms were rented by a member-turned-informant working with the FBI, a man named Ernesto Castro, who spent well over a year sitting across from men who would have killed him without hesitation had they known what he was doing. One of the rooms, on August 28, 1994, was rented by Shryock himself. That single detail is the reason he later had legal standing to fight the recordings in court, standing almost none of his co-defendants had. It didn't help him. The evidence against him was, by the court's own description, overwhelming. On January 4, 1995, on one of those same tapes, Shryock brought up a man he described only as a brother who had dropped out of the organization a long time back. He said the man used to live right below his own apartment and never once came upstairs to show his face. Now the man was showing up around the neighborhood again. Shryock told the room he needed a silencer. Then he said something else, on the same tape, in the same breath, that he only wanted to kill the man himself, not the little kids. The man he was talking about was Anthony Moreno, the same man who had walked into the Mexican Mafia beside him in the same prison 23 years earlier. According to people close to Moreno, he brushed off every warning he was given. He told his own brother that Shryock wasn't a threat to him because the two of them had known each other for more than 2 decades. On April 2, 1995, at 3:54 in the afternoon, cameras law enforcement had hidden inside a hotel room captured something that had never been filmed before or since. The actual vote to induct a new member into the Mexican Mafia. Shryock sat in the corner of the room and raised his hand to sponsor a man named Luis Maciel, known on the street as Pelon. Almost everyone in the room pushed back. One member said flatly that nobody there knew this man. Not one person in the room had ever run with him, drank with him, spent real time with him. Another argued he was too small to protect himself inside, that the books for new members were supposed to be closed anyway, that they'd have to look out for him later instead of the other way around. Shryock had an answer for all of it. The man had already proven himself, had already handled business, had already gone against his own neighborhood on the organization's behalf. That was worth more, he said, than anyone in the room happening to know him personally. The room wasn't convinced, and Shryock didn't move anyway. I already raised my hand for him, he told them. Now you all make your choice. 20 days later, 5 people were dead. That afternoon, Maciel stopped by the house on Maxon Road. He brought heroin, asked after the family, made small talk on the porch. 2 younger men came with him and said almost nothing the whole time, looking the property over. That night, a pager went off somewhere across town. 3 men climbed out of a car. The 5 people killed were Anthony Moreno, his sister Maria Moreno, Gustavo Aguirre, 5-year-old Laura Moreno, and 6-month-old Ambrose Padilla. Prosecutors argued the order had come from Shryock. He was never charged in connection with this particular shooting. The following morning, Moreno's brother went looking for answers, and he asked the 2 men he thought might have them. He asked Maciel first. Maciel denied it and said he'd spent that whole day at his own son's baptism. Then he asked Shryock. Shryock told him he was sorry to hear the news, denied any involvement, and offered his condolences. Then he added that if he had done it, he would have done it differently. There's an unwritten rule inside the Mexican Mafia against killing children, and members who break it, even by accident, usually become the next ones marked for death themselves. One of the shooters that night was later sentenced to death, and about 4 months after that sentence, he was stabbed to death on death row at San Quentin. Maciel, the man Shryock had personally sponsored into the organization 20 days before the killings, was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death as well. 2 more men received well over a century in prison apiece. 1 got life without parole. 3 men who pulled triggers or drove cars that night were sentenced to death for it. The man, prosecutors say, gave the original order was never charged in this case at all. Everything connecting him to those 5 deaths lives on a hotel room tape recorded 3 months earlier. A man saying on the record that he wanted someone dead, but not the children, and then getting the second half of that wish and none of the first. Shryock's own conviction came from a different case entirely, the racketeering trial that grew out of those hotel room tapes. He stood trial alongside a group of other members and associates, and the case ran 8 months. The judge impaneled an anonymous jury, telling jurors it was only to protect their privacy from curiosity seekers. Ernesto Castro, the informant who had rented most of those hotel rooms, took the stand against a man he had once called a brother, one of roughly 125 witnesses called over the course of the trial. Prosecutors played roughly 275 audio recordings for the jury before it was over. Shryock was convicted of Arasco's murder, along with racketeering and conspiracy charges tied to years of Mexican Mafia business. On September 3, 1997, he was sentenced to life in federal prison. An appeals court upheld the conviction in 2003, addressing his argument in a single line, "There is no parole in the federal system." In 2020, from a federal prison in Victorville, California, Shryock asked a judge for compassionate release, citing a hepatitis C diagnosis he said had gone untreated. Court records showed he had signed a form refusing that same treatment 2 years earlier. He also pointed to rising coronavirus case numbers inside the facility. The judge denied the request, writing that release would undercut respect for the law and the need for just punishment. By most accounts from people who knew him inside the system, Shryock rose to become one of a small handful of men the Mexican Mafia's federal wing treats as something like a governing council. The small group whose word settles disputes the rest of the organization can't settle on its own. According to one account, he holds that position now mostly because everyone ahead of him is gone. The men who held it before him either got out or died, and he was simply the most senior member left standing when the seats came open. Younger members have pushed against his standing in recent years, the same way younger men always eventually push against older ones. By the same account, more killings trace back to him than to any other members still active in the organization today, which is exactly the kind of record that keeps a man in that seat long after everyone his own age has either dropped out or been buried. According to a former member, he was also moved back to the federal supermax in Colorado after an incident involving a rival prison group. Not long ago, by one account, his daughter died of a fentanyl overdose. Shryock said on tape that he only wanted to kill one man, not the children. It didn't matter. Inside an organization where an order has to pass through several other people before it reaches a trigger, what the man giving it actually wanted stopped mattering somewhere along the way. He once asked a friend to make him one promise for life, because a promise was about the only thing he still believed in by then. In that same hotel room where he raised his hand for a stranger, Almost everyone else who sat with their back to the camera that day is dead now, killed by the same organization they were sitting there to serve. If loyalty that hard actually kept anyone safe, this story would end differently. It doesn't end differently. Not for the men in that room, and not for the family on Maxon Road. Somewhere out there right now, a young man is being told the same thing Shryock was told in 1972. That this organization will be his family. That it will look out for him in a way nobody else ever has. Some of them are watching videos right now, trying to decide if that's true. If this story made you stop and think, hit the like button. That is how YouTube decides to show this to more young people who might be hearing the wrong voices right now. Drop your city in the comments. Every comment tells the algorithm this story matters. And if you are watching on your phone, hit the hype button below the video. Hype only works on mobile, and it is the fastest way to get this in front of someone who needs to hear it before they make a decision they cannot take back.